Hello everybody, welcome to Eternal Card Breakdowns. My name is Pojo, and the promo card for August of 2018 is here, announcing Genetrix Irel the 4th, a 2/2 for 4, with double time, double justice, +1 maximum power, and summon, give one of your other units +4/+4 while you have Genetrix Irel the 4th. This is a really interesting card for a lot of different reasons. It's fairly tough to evaluate, even though it is formed of a lot of very, very simple pieces. But there are some interesting things to say about it, I think, and we're definitely going to talk about all of them. First things first, let's talk a little bit about lore stuff and what's going on with Genetrix in the first place. Genetrix in the plotline has been invited to basically witness Ailin's coronation, and after seeing all of the events that unfold with Talir and Ailin and Caleb at the Eternal Throne, is moving around trying to basically unseal some things inside her Solist library, which is a Cambrai faction that we have as of yet been somewhat unintroduced to, or this is a new introduction to a new type of Cambrai. Yeah, and it's pretty interesting. While the Solists are not specifically Cambrai, they do exist in the sort of Cambrai lands and fall, of course, under the Cambrai banner of influence. So they are all about knowledge and seeking knowledge and storing knowledge and preserving it. And to that extent, they have a very solid vault of interesting toys, which I'm sure that we will be seeing some more of in later setups. I think it's interesting that we're exploring more of the Cambrai in general. I do want to see more of the Cambrai in general. I do want to see, I think, the one thing about the lore here that doesn't work for me here in terms of expressing it in eternal form is that we haven't really gotten a good introduction to some of the things that are just very basic about the Cambrai. I think most people don't really know much about what's going on there, who the leaders are. They don't really know anything about Vodeken or what's going on with the universities, or whether or not it's a university or a temple or a mix of both, which I believe is sort of where we're going. So it's kind of interesting that we are already sort of moving on to a different faction when we could perhaps be exploring some really interesting characters like Vodeken as well. But maybe we'll get some backstory on those characters later. I would be excited to see more of that in addition to expanding on the story, but I'm always happy to see expansions on the story as well. And Genetrix looks like a pretty interesting character, so we're gonna talk a little bit more about her as time goes on. I'm not sure if she'll play an active role in the plot. She seems very similar to Bren in some respects, and maybe these are pieces that are being put into play to take a larger role in the plot later, but might be it's something interesting to keep an eye on. So yeah, Genetrix has a couple of different abilities, and she's sort of a mix of various Cambrai good stuff. Cambrai is very good at ramping, so we have some +1 maximum power bonus on her, and it's also very good at generating efficient stats. So we have essentially 6/6 in stats for a cost of 4. That's a little bit better than a Sandstorm Titan, but it's divided in a way that is not particularly safe and is indeed very, very risky. Genetrix is pretty easily killed by a wide variety of spells, including Suffocate, Torch, Piercing Shot, basically any 2/2. She can't really block or trade effectively. She's very unlikely to ever be a unit that actually qualifies as advantage on board. So the +4/+4 really has to be measured in terms of what it provides to other units and whether or not it's actually going to draw attention to Genetrix. I think the first thing to note about Genetrix that is actually a really big point in her favor is that she is a threat that has to be answered. Because she basically requires a torch, if you play her, you're going to get a torch out of your opponent's hand, you're going to get a Suffocate out of your opponent's hand. It's very unlikely that your opponent's just going to ignore Genetrix because she's doing too many good things. So if you can find ways to protect her, then you can basically get your opponent to spend a lot of their tricks and get into a position where you can then start playing other bigger bombs, which is sort of where we're going to be talking about Genetrix in terms of the grander play scheme. Now, with promo cards are typically pretty good cards. I actually think that overall, the current promo releases have been hitting it pretty well. There's been a sort of feeling that they are underpowered, but in actuality, they've generally been doing pretty good. Wyatt actually made it into Gunslingers and felt pretty good in that deck. We had a lot of interesting Gunslinger decks, even in the top 8, where we were just seeing cool Gunslingers in different places. It's been really interesting seeing how these promo cards have sort of succeeded in being in decks that are not currently in the meta. And that's, I think, actually something that we really want to talk about here, because Genetrix is not that great with some of the current setups that we have, namely Combrei Alessi and Combrei Aggro. And it really seems like she should be, because she's a big old pile of stats for a fairly low cost. But there are two things that are holding her back here. The first is that deep influence cost. Double time, double justice means that she often comes down on like turn 5 or 6 in a more aggressive deck that's not trying to do a lot of fixing. And also her level of stats means that she's very easy to kill and sort of surprise if you're doing like a big aggro rush. So if you're trying to like charge in with units, your opponent is probably holding up some sort of interesting tricks, might be throwing cards before like a stand together. That's actually one thing that's really interesting about Genetrix, is that like if you have the ability to hold up power on turn 4, like oftentimes your opponent will just spend their fast spell removal right now to get rid of cards before stand together happens, like when you don't have power available. Genetrix changes that around a little bit. She makes it so that it's actually pretty important to hold a torch if you are running a deck with Genetrix. So in an aggro style, that makes it a little bit of a more interesting decision tree for your opponents, and that might be a place where she fits in a little bit in terms of Alessi decks. I don't think that she's particularly strong in Alessi decks, just because like overall she's not providing too much to the deck. The deck often runs at like 3 or less for a pretty long time. It uses a lot of cards that are fairly aggressive and require spells to function, and Genetrix kind of just buys up all the power in that deck and makes it a little bit difficult to roll on. She's not a necessarily bad play in the deck, but like you might really be preferring to grab Stand Together here, or play down another 3-drop or something along those lines while leaving up a card like Safe Return. So yeah, maybe not so much in that deck. But that's not what promo cards are for. Promo cards are really not designed to reinforce the best deck in the format, and I'm actually really glad that she doesn't. What I think that Genetrix really kind of might be shining in is decks that are actually a little bit more late game focused and are a little more big Combrei. We haven't seen, like basically if we're looking to play cards like Predatory Carnosaur and Thundering Karasaur, then we're going to be playing some early ramp cards like Trailmaker or Initiative Sands, which already give us some maximum power, but also make it so, like in the case of Trailmaker, so that we have the influence for Genetrix Irel IV. And I'd actually make the argument that Trailmaker is going to be the most common target for Genetrix's summon effect. That is a permanent +4/+4 bonus, so she'd turn a Trailmaker into like a 6/5 attacker and render it fairly torch-proof, force your opponent to focus on Genetrix instead of your Trailmaker, keeps you from losing out to like a Hailstorm while still ramping you. So yeah, there's some interesting things about that. She's one of the only 4-cost ramp cards. There are actually 2 others, a Zindel the Wayfinder, who doesn't see a lot of play, and Memento Mori, which is more of a influence fixer for 5-color decks, but can be used in certain decks if you really want to get your guaranteed power. So I think that Genetrix kind of belongs in bigger mid-range beatdown decks, because one, she's very good at reinforcing smaller units that are basically direly in need of those summon effects, as opposed to very efficient Combrei units like Awakened Student, Alessi, anything that has like already a lot of good stats and plenty of ways to defend itself. Genetrix is more about making sure that cards like Temple Scribe or Trailmaker or Veteran Strategist are actually effective cards that you can use. So I think that she helps out with that part of the deck quite a bit, because she gives you some interesting power in the mid game while also moving you up towards 6 a lot faster and drawing removal that could be otherwise reserved for your big stuff, although Genetrix is pretty easy to like take out with a lot of smaller removal as well, and that is, I think, the biggest point against her as far as power level is concerned. I think that if the meta is heavy with torches and suffocates and Rindra's Choice or anything like that, it's pretty hard to get Genetrix to function in a deck, but if the meta is more focused on dealing with larger units, then Genetrix actually provides you a pretty interesting play, because she makes a unit that is small more vanquishable, drawing attention away from your bigger units, and then she allows you to play those bigger units faster, meaning that you can do Mystic Ascendant, you can do Thundering Karasaur, you can do Predatory Carnosaur very, very quickly. And I think that that's actually really interesting. So yeah, as a card, she is just a necessary threat. That is the biggest point in her favor. She does a lot of things at once. She provides very clear advantage on the board. The main thing about her is that she trades poorly, and so you have to find ways to protect her, or you have to play her in situations where you are otherwise like not going to be doing anything, like, or where your opponent is, where you're fairly certain that your opponent is not going to be doing anything. So like, yeah, I am not sure if you play this card as a 4-drop if you don't have any units down. I think that a 2/2 with +1 maximum power is actually maybe a reasonable thing to put down, and may just draw the same torches or suffocates that you would draw otherwise, so it's not necessarily a horrible thing to just lay this down to try and get to your big 6-drop or anything like that. But that does render her a little less useful in the late game when you are top decking her, and it renders her not very helpful after harsh rules and any other sort of big like overwhelm effects. The coolest thing about Genetrix, I think, is that if you play her onto a board and she survives for a turn, which is that is the big question, like, can you get Genetrix to survive for a turn? If you do, then she can immediately play a card like Sword of Unity with the kicker. She can do just a lot of really ridiculous things, like play into Martial Ironthorn, just do like sort of the big rampy Combre stuff. I think that's where she belongs. In terms of power level, I question whether this card is going to be good enough to push decks like that over the top, or even push them into a serious like meta scenario, but I think that is where she's going to be the most interesting, and that like big Combre decks can definitely have a lot of fun with this card. In particular, because she is a ramp card that plays really well with a lot of big Combre stuff, she could bring back Seraph, a 3/4 with Overwhelm that is not really being seen very much in the meta right now, but is like extremely good for its 8-cost ability, but also could be very good with Genetrix, because once it becomes a 7/8 with Overwhelm, it is a really devastating card to have on turn 4. So you could do some pretty disgusting things with that, and then also get yourself some extra maximum power out so that you can ramp out bigger stuff and play with like all of your big power stuff. So yeah, like the Vodakins, the Mystic Ascendants, all of the old like set 1 stuff. That's the stuff to bring back out when you're looking at ways to play with Genetrix. Whether or not she actually manages to beef up those decks is an interesting question, but overall, I think she provides some interesting variety to Combre and gives the deck a very interesting card to play with while not increasing the power level of an already tier 1 deck. And for that reason, generally in favor of her. Seems pretty cool. Gonna pick up some copies, see what we can do with her. Overall, I like the design quite a bit. The art is interesting. I'm kind of curious about the soul lists, and it's good to see like more, just more like cool characters being introduced to the set. Like, this is just an interesting little stepping stone on our way to release, and I'm hoping that the next one we see is going to be some sort of new Vara or some sort of new like interesting cool promo that like maybe marks the actual release of Eternal, since I think we're looking at that in a month or so. Anyways, yeah, that is it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to like, subscribe if you like the video and all of that. I'm on Twitch. You can sub me with Twitch Prime if you have Amazon Prime, and I believe that the Eternal Collector's Bounty for 33 packs is still active, so that's a pretty cool thing to do if you want to get like a bunch of starter packs and get started with Eternal. That's it from me, and I hope everyone has a good night. See you guys next time with more Eternal card breakdowns and brews. Cheers.